This episode of the podcast is all about the fundamental principles of why people buy, specifically the 5 core principles of why people buy. Because despite all of the changes that we have with social media, marketing in general, different platforms, different technologies, different ways in which we can communicate with our audience, fundamentally, the reason why people buy and what makes people part with their money and invest in your service and in your product, that hasn't changed for well over 100 years, since back in the days of Claude Hopkins and co, right through to the direct marketers of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on. The platform has changed. The platforms and the mediums have changed, but the principles have stayed the same. So I want to dive into those 5 core principles. Once we've done that, I'm going to launch into our tip of the week. The tip of the week is about leveraging your podcast guests for more reach on social media. If you are Maybe you're even just doing lives on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, and you're interviewing people. You might be doing it for a YouTube channel or podcast. You can leverage those interviews in different ways so that it becomes more of a content creation tool rather than just an interview that you put out, which has its own benefit, obviously. We're then going to move into our Maverick messages, the questions that we're getting from people listening to the podcast, from my clients, people who are messaging me on Instagram. And this time, we're delving into the concept of at what point does social proof become sleazy? At what point is maybe talking too much about the results that you're getting for people? Is there a point at which that becomes off-putting for your potential customers? We're going to explore that a little bit later. And in the final segment of the show, we're going to talk about social media news. I'm specifically focusing on an article which looked at a bunch of data about the impact and the attention of paid ad traffic on various different social media platforms, and which social media platforms turned out to be more favorable for your ad spend. So if you're someone who is either running ads right now, thinking of running ads right now, that study had some very, very interesting insights as to which platforms you might want to prioritize. So stick around for that. And of course, there is always a little bit of a freebie to help you get started with your social media marketing in the notes of wherever you're consuming this piece of content. So if you're listening to the podcast on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, then click the link in the show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, again, in the description of the video will be a link where you can grab a free 32-page guide to help you get more leads and sales from social media, even if you have a small following. The tips are practical, they're insightful, and they're all based on direct response principles that have stood the test of time, which we're going to dive into right now a little bit. So we're going to talk about these 5 fundamentals, principles of why people buy. The first one is quite simply money. People want more of it. People want more money. They want more cash. They want more of everything. They want to be able to buy cool stuff. And therefore, if your offer, your thing that you are promoting gives them the promise of more money, then likely that's going to push a few of those core buttons that are going to get people to part with their cash. It's kind of like a very simple equation. Like, let's take, for example, ad traffic, which I kind of alluded to, we're going to kind of touch on later, is that if I was to say that if you give me £1, I will give you £2 back, that's a good investment, right? I'm appealing to your desire to have more money in that sense. So when you're looking at Facebook ads or you're looking at Instagram ads, LinkedIn, YouTube, wherever, if the return on that ad spend is significantly greater than the initial dollars and pounds that you put in, then that is going to be very appealing. So that's just a very simple way in which an advertising platform could appeal to that desire for more money. And if you are in an industry whereby you can make a very strong promise around money, that is a core thing that is going to get people to buy. I'll give you a couple of examples. One from my own business. So obviously my business is all about marketing, whether that is on social media, whether that is in long form content like articles and podcasts, and whether it is on email marketing. So kind of the broad marketing spectrum in the digital age, let's say. And so therefore, one of the reasons why people want to learn how to promote their business is to make more money. So several of the marketing angles that I can use in my marketing is going to be around money, because that's ultimately what people want. Yes, people want to learn how to maybe write a sales page, but they want to write a sales page because they want to get more clients, because they want to get more money. I can teach them how to create a really nice lead magnet and create a sales funnel from that. But essentially, they're doing that not to learn those things for the sake of it, but to get more money out of the back end. And then I could teach them how to do email marketing, how to write stories in their emails. And again, they're not doing that just for the heck of it. They're doing it because they want to have that skill to turn into cash in the bank. So when I'm thinking about various different marketing angles, I won't always talk about money, but it's going to be one of the key drivers, because I know that is one of the things that for my audience, that's going to basically get them to buy. And obviously, I've got to back that up with proof, and I've got to show that I have credibility and I have the ability to do those various things. I might share social proof, I might show client results and my method and give knowledge like this. And that's all a way for me to give that confidence that when I use that marketing angle of money, that it comes from that base of credibility. Another example, I have a client of mine, a one-to-one client of mine, who delivers coaching from a health and fitness point of view to other personal trainers. So he's like training the trainers, as it were, and he's helping them to get a physical transformation, but also he's teaching them how to get the right processes in place so that they can get the same results for their clients, right? So this process of, I'm going to teach you how to get your own transformation and the process by which you can get your clients repeatable and reliable transformations as well. So you could have various different marketing angles that talked about, okay, you're going to have this rippling six pack and muscles or whatever, and I'm going to show you, give you all these processes and things like that. That is one marketing angle. Obviously, you make that sound better. I'm literally just talking off the top of my head here. You actually think about it for more than a half second and come up with something good. But the point being is that you could create marketing angles on all of those different things, multiple ones combined together, and so on and so forth. But you also want to ultimately think about, what does that person actually want to achieve? What is that end result they really want? If it is in this case that it's a personal trainer, well, why do they want to not only get a physical transformation, but they also want to learn a process whereby they can get their clients a similar physical transformation? Well, essentially, it's because they want more money. Because you could argue that having a physique for a certain demographic of people, that would be a sales tool. You become sort of like a walking billboard for your business. So that's going to help you attract more people. Maybe if there are other men and women who want to build muscle and get in shape, or whatever their particular goal is, maybe they want an IFBB pro card, whatever, they're probably, without knowing any of the background to people, their skill sets, their experience, their first port of call is going to be, what does this person look like? That's just a reality of the situation. It maybe not should not be that way, but that is the way. We do judge books by their covers. And therefore, being that person in the gym who is that walking billboard for that service is going to get you more clients and vis-a-vis more money. Then you've got the side of the equation, which is teaching people how to get repeatable and reliable results for their clients. That is also driving towards that real fundamental principle of why people buy, which is money, because you are going to be able to say, right, okay, you can get a client come to you with from any different background or whatever, and I can put them through this process and they will get a almost guaranteed transformation after a certain number of weeks. That then allows you to have more client retention. That then allows you to have more clients queuing up to work with you because you have such great results. And therefore, that is a money thing. So therefore, if you can, and again, you don't have to labor on money being everything, and you don't have to have it as everything throughout your marketing, but you want to understand that money is a key driver of why people buy. So if you have the ability to use that in your marketing, then you should do so. The second one that we want to think about, our second fundamental principle of why people buy, is status. They want to be seen to be competing or keeping up with the Joneses, as the phrase goes, or being several rungs above everybody else. One of the examples that I have from way back when was I had a friend who was a golf instructor, and we were talking about his lead magnet that he was developing and talking about like hitting the driver further and farther or whatever. And one of the angles that we came up for his marketing was that it was about hitting the drive further than your mates on the golf course, like being that person in the group of people who, loves golf or whatever, that you are the leader of that pack. You are the one who can hit the driver the farthest. That's a simple way of raising your status in that group of people. And it might be and a different example. So for example, if you were to buy a Gucci bag, right? People buy brands like Gucci, like Chanel or Versace for a status thing. It comes with that sort of inbuilt thing that person has money, that person has wealth, that person has, well, maybe it comes with that person has taste. I don't know. Have you seen some of the clothes that these brands release? But anyway, it comes with that level of status. Similarly, driving an expensive car. Therefore, you can create that separation. In the UK, there are the Marks and Spencer's adverts that talk about this isn't just any sticky toffee pudding. This is a Marks and Spencer's sticky toffee pudding. That's a status thing almost, that you're kind of saying, okay, this is just better than the rest, right? And again, if I was to look at my own marketing from that point of view, is that most of my, whether they are courses, coaching programs, whatever, are probably more expensive than my competitors. Now there's a reason for that, partly because without wishing to blow my own trumpet, I feel like I have a little bit more experience than many of those competitors. Plus, there is a thing about there's a quality element. Like you're going to get more quality and insights and things like that. And therefore that has a level of status that goes with it. So you can appeal to status. The third thing is health. And health is a very, very personal thing. Like people want to live longer, be healthier and stuff like that. So you can appeal to that innate desire that people want to, whether it's at a certain age, they want to be more mobile, they want to live longer, whether it's they want to be thinner, be more muscular, or whatever the goal is, you can appeal to that health aspect. Now, that's obviously going to appeal to certain demographics and certain niches, but it's important to understand that getting to that point of achieving greater health, or maybe even expanding that to include like beauty. So for example, if you were looking at products, beauty products or beauty treatments and things like that, that is appealing to, you could say that is a health thing, a beauty thing, but also semi-status thing. But again, understanding that these are the things that make people buy is going to be important for expanding all of the different marketing angles that you could have within your business and within your offers. Our fourth one is people want to escape pain. And you could also argue that they want to get towards a certain degree of like satisfaction or pleasure or anything like that. But also people want to escape pain. They have a problem. The old cliche is that people are going, if you've got a broken bone, you basically want to get that fixed right now. But the prevention of that broken bone, people kind of would leave that alone. Like they wouldn't really kind of see that as an immediate thing that they need to solve. Whereas if people have a specific issue, like something's broken, let's say it's broken within their business processes, for example, marketing in my field, if their marketing is broken, then it might be the case that they're sending emails. It might be that they're posting daily on social media, but there's nothing coming back the other way. There are no leads coming in. There's no engagement on that content. People aren't responding to the email CTAs. And that person is now putting in a lot of effort to try and grow their business, but they are in pain because that effort, that drive, that desire to grow that business, it's just hitting a brick wall every single time. And therefore, if I can offer them a clear path away from that pain, and I can describe and really empathize with where they are right now, and maybe even, for example, use clients to show how I've gone from this particular pain point and taken them to this ideal goal that they want to get to, that is a powerful thing that will make people buy. You can use the same approach, for example, in my old business of weight loss and things like that. The pain is that they are basically feeling like they're overweight and they're unfit and they can't do certain things, can't fit into certain clothes or whatever it is. And maybe they've been trying lots of different diets, spending thousands of pounds on supplements, and it's not really doing anything. It's not going anywhere. They're super confused about what they should be doing. Lots of different viewpoints on social media. I mean, my wife sends me various different reels and TikToks multiple times per day and with a question mark to saying, is this true? Most of them will respond, nope, absolute BS, move on, don't use Instagram for your weight loss advice. But anyway, that's a different story. But people are trying to escape that pain. So if I can show them a pathway to getting away from that pain and a tangible, and the thing that you want to remember is that when you're kind of describing how to get away from pain and towards the goal that people want, is you can't just say, like, I'll help you stop thinking about this and get to here. Like, that's just very, very simple. That's just very, very basic. One of the ways that you might want to explore that is to have what's called a unique mechanism. That's basically crystallizing your process and your method into that. It's that tangible roadmap. And if you've ever read the book Breakthrough Advertising by Eugene Schwartz, which is kind of like a copywriting and advertising must read. That book's been around since like the 60s, and that's still used to this day by, I would say, most people who are, semi-serious about their copywriting and their advertising and their marketing have probably read that book, or at least they've heard of that book. And one of the things that he talks about is that the maturity of the market, the maturity of the niche matters for how you communicate your product and your service. For example, let's keep using weight loss. And I think he uses weight loss in the book, if I remember correctly, as an example. Imagine like going way back when to diets never existed, at least like a commercial diet sold as a product or a service. That never existed whenever that was the case. The person who figured out, okay, right, there's this thing called calorie deficit, or probably wasn't even called calorie deficit then, but there was this, and I'll package it up and I'll call it a diet, and I'll get people to pay me money and they can then find out how to go through this process of losing weight, right? Imagine the first person to ever come up with that idea. He can just, or she could just say, here's how to lose weight. And people would not have a concept of any other processes, and therefore it would be an easy sell. Now, after that becomes a thing, there are going to be other people swarming into that market, creating their own products and stuff like that. So now you've got to go a little bit more in depth with that promise on the front end. And you'll get to the point where that market becomes savvier and savvier and savvier, is that you can't just say, I'll get you results, I'll help you lose weight. You've got to dip more into the how. And even beyond that, your how, your way of doing stuff has to be unique. Now, you might say that, well, I haven't got a process. Every client is different and stuff like that, which is true, but you still have a process. Like for me, from a marketing point of view, is that every client and every business that I work with is different. They are in different circumstances. They might, in some cases, sell similar things, but they're at different stages. The product is slightly different. The way they do it is slightly different. My job is to figure out, okay, well, what's this like process that they go through? How do we kind of like crystallize that? One of the clients that springs to mind is from the fitness industry who worked basically on habits and used that as a long-term approach to sustainability in terms of weight loss and things like that. And he had this great process that he used, but no one knew about it because he couldn't find a way of trying to badge that up and package that up as something sellable from a marketing point of view. So that's what we worked on, is developing what he now calls the core four, which is essentially the 4 things that people need to work on in terms of habits. And there's lots of things within those core 4s and so on and so on and so on. So packaging something up as a unique mechanism. Thinking of that client, he can kind of say, I'll help you lose weight using habits. Okay, that wouldn't work probably for most people, but any variations of that with a bit more thought might. But then being able to say, right, this is exactly how I'll do it. I'll use my core 4 process to do you an initial assessment to see where you're at. Then we'll tailor your habit process so that we can focus on the right things at the right times, and we'll guide you through all of these sorts of things. So we tick off all these boxes, right? Now that's something tangible. That roadmap that you're promising people is something that they can see, and they can say, right, okay, you're right. I can start here and I can go to here if I follow all of these steps. And it's important that when you're talking about escaping pain, is that you give them that roadmap. You give them that pathway from where they are right now to where it is they want to be. Otherwise, you're just throwing out basically word vomit that no one's going to pay that much attention to. So that's crucial. Now, our 5th reason why people buy is actually probably contains 6 different things in it, but we're going to skip through it as one whole entire point. And that is, or those are the persuasion principles. These are the things that if you've read Robert Cialdini's Influence, Persuasion, or his 50 Ways to Yes, any of those books, this is basically the foundation for pretty much every marketing book that exists from the, I don't know, when Influence was written, mid-80s, late 80s, something like that. Every book since then, either directly or indirectly, has some form of influence, excuse the pun, from Robert Cialdini's persuasion principles. So we need to understand these because these are actually like the tactics that we use in copy and in email and sales pages to actually get people over the line and part with their cash, right? So we'll rattle through a few of them. One is social proof. So basically showing people that you can do what you say you do, right? And that might be through testimonials. It might be through before and after images or something like that. Or it might just be loads of credibility that basically you do what you say you do, right? That's social proof. You've got the likability factor, which is essentially like people will buy from people that they like. Now, that person who they like has got to be able to get results. You're not going to buy from someone because you like them, even if they can't get you a result. That's never going to happen. But if you've got people who are similarly offering similar services, they can both get results. You may go with the person who you like more, right? And people like buy for really weird reasons off the back of that like likability factor. For example, I've had people buy from me because I like Star Wars. I listen to heavy metal music. and of the way that I talk and the way that I communicate. There's a likability factor from lots of different things, which is why you should look to include your personality, your unique characteristics in lots of your content, your emails, the way you write, the way you talk, all of those different things. That's super important. By the way, I'm not going to go through all of the persuasion principles. Go read the book if you want to. It is a little bit dry, a little bit dull, but well worth the read. We're just going to touch on a few of the key ones. So we've got likability, we've got social proof, and we've got the third one I would probably look at is authority. People buy from people who they respect and they look up to. So how do you create authority in your niche? And a super simple way of doing that is, or one of the ways of doing that, is by association. You can, if you're kind of in the same crowd as people at the top of your niche, then you get talked about in that same crowd. And one simple way you can do that is like a podcast, right? So if you start doing a podcast and you get some good guests on, you start to elevate your association with those people. And by that person, let's say that they are several rungs up the ladder compared to you, by them saying, I went on this person's podcast, I enjoyed it, that's almost them validating you to their audience in a way. Obviously, you've still got loads more work to do after that, but just in terms of being in the right conversations, that helps. The other thing about maybe long form content as well, which I talked about with my sister-in-law, Gina Esposito, on a previous episode of the podcast, was that social media, because it's very reductive, it condenses everything down into sound bites, 15-second clips and stuff like that. There is no real nuance, context, and often it can seem as though the experts are on the same level as the amateurs. But what the amateurs can't do to a degree of credibility is talk at length about any subject off the top of their head with meaningful information, value, and credibility. I'll give you an example. This podcast right now that I'm recording is totally off the cuff. There, I have basically in front of me 5 bullet points. One says money, status, health, escape pain, persuasion principles. They are the 5 things that I've got written down. There are no other notes for this podcast. And therefore, that adds to, I feel, a level of credibility. Is it switch the camera on, ask me to talk about 5 things, and I can give value, I can give insights and stuff that is helpful to people. I believe that an amateur would either bullshit their way through that entire thing, or they just wouldn't be able to do it. So by being able to have long form content, you show immediate authority and credibility. I'll give you another example. When I was running my fitness business, I Am Paradise Fitness, I also had a podcast called Lean Life Radio. And by the time I wrapped that podcast up and closed that business down to do what I'm doing now full time, is that I'd recorded 850 episodes of that podcast. 850, they were daily podcasts by the end of it. 850 podcasts about any topic of nutrition, training, mindset you could possibly think of. And to be able to record 850 episodes is in itself, and to be able to talk and give value on each of those episodes, that takes a lot of effort. It also takes a lot of knowledge, and therefore it adds instant authority. I had several people join my coaching program simply off the back that I'd released a lot of podcast episodes. They'd listen to, maybe binge through like 5, 6, 7 podcasts, something like that. And then literally one person said on a sales call to me that I figured I could listen to all of these podcasts, get all of the information, figure it all out, how to put it all together, or I could just ask you to do it for me. And that's where we're at. That call lasted about 5 minutes because the authority that I had created by simply being able to talk consistently and give consistent value about a subject gives people the confidence that you are who you say you are and you can deliver what you say you deliver. So they would be like maybe like the 3 persuasion principles that I would focus on. There are others that you can kind of delve into. I would definitely encourage you to go and buy the book. Probably you might want to start with influence, but Persuasion is probably the book that's most relevant to businesses. Influence is written from the perspective of this is what businesses do to try and influence you as a consumer. So beware. But that runs you through the 6 persuasion principles. Persuasion is written from the business's point of view. This is how to persuade people. And then 50 Ways to Yes is basically a very short, easy to consume book. I'd say that's probably the easiest to read, but probably not the most in depth, as you were. So maybe go and take your pick, depending on what type of books you like. So that is our section on Maverick marketing. Those are the 5 fundamental principles of why people buy. Our next section of the podcast is our tip of the week. In the tip of the week, I basically look back through the content that I've created, whether it is articles, podcasts, YouTube, social media, whatever, and extract something from there, delve into it a little bit more to give you an extra insight or two, and maybe even some tips. So my tip of the week is related to podcasts and podcast guests. Now, this could also apply to an Instagram Live, Facebook Live, LinkedIn Live, wherever you could do a live, where basically anywhere where you can interview someone, this is going to work, right? And what you want to think about is trying to expand the benefits of that interview, that content, beyond just an interview. And I'll give you 2 examples. One is a Twitter, I believe they call it a tweet storm, which is basically just a thread of tweets all strung together, right? About the takeaways that I got from my interview with my business mentor, Chris Orzechowski, which actually releases a couple of days after this particular episode of the show. We were delving into email marketing. And when I record the episode of the podcast with him, and I did that interview, the software that I use, what happens is that once that recording is done, then the AI function of the software goes through that podcast, summarize the notes and things like that I can use on YouTube and on podcast platforms. It also gives me like 5 to 10 key takeaways from that specific podcast. It kind of summarizes the things that we talked about. So then I thought, okay, right, cool. That's kind of like done a lot of work for me to kind of summarize those key takeaways. So what I did was I transferred those key takeaways with a little bit of tweaking and editing and adding a little bit of information here and there into 8 separate or 8 tweets that combined into one thread. I also put the whole thing together as a carousel on Instagram, pushed that out on Facebook, and so on and so forth, right? So from an AI-generated list of key takeaways, I've got several pieces of content that can go out and keep generating me more interest. What I can also do is take those 8 key takeaways and take the transcript of that podcast and start to piece together an article that would also exist as long form content. Because maybe I'm biased because long form content is essentially what grew my fitness business back in 2018, 2019, is that by producing long form podcasts, that attracted people to my social media. The social media content then kind of reinforced all the messages that they had on the podcast, join my email list, and so on and so forth. But the podcast was the thing that got me the most reach immediately. And therefore, I'm a huge fan of long form content. So by producing a podcast, an article, YouTube video, whatever it is, you can use that as your vehicle to create the short form social media content. For example, like when I've finished recording this particular episode of the podcast, I can get AI to chop me up multiple clips that are less than 30 seconds long. In terms of the work that I have to do to then populate social media with a lot of that content, it's very, very minimal. You have a lot of tools at your disposal when you have what I would call like a hero piece of content, that being your long form content. So you have the hero piece of content at the top from which you take out and you section out other smaller pieces of content. From a podcast, you can record that with audio and visual. So you put the visual out on YouTube. You can take the transcript, you can create an article. From the video, you can create short form clips. You can create a carousel from the takeaways. You can create tweets from those takeaways. You can look for specific quotes from your article and your transcript and put those out as tweets as well. You can summarize the entire article that you've written in a carousel. You can effectively get probably 20 plus pieces of content from one podcast. And when you're thinking about, okay, well, it takes you a lot of time to create all this content and do all this sort of stuff. If you're doing it from one piece of hero content, that content creation time is slashed by a massive amount, because by using AI in the right way, not to create everything from scratch, but just to kind of shape an initial thought that you can then start to edit and tweak and adjust and put into your own voice. That's where you get faster at producing content, high quality content at scale across multiple platforms. The other thing that I would take from this particular tip is that collaborations with your podcast guests work wonders. For example, from the point at which I released a podcast with Gina, I created an AI generated clip, which I basically just added captions over the top. That generated a huge amount of interest compared to other posts that I had posted. It didn't set the world on fire. It wasn't the most viral piece of content you'll ever see. But in terms of like engagement, in terms of the percentage increase of reach and things like that over and above what I was used to, it was a significant jump. Gina then also cut her own clip using you basically used one of the AI clips I generated and put it on her own profile. And both of those clips, we collaborated with each other. And essentially, you're increasing the reach because both audiences are getting access to that one piece of content. So if you can, when you do those interviews and you chop up those clips using AI, or if you do them yourself manually, is pushing those pieces of content out as a collaboration allows you to extend the reach. Plus, you're not just getting reach from that person's audience who is immediately engaging with the wider piece of content. For example, if I record a podcast with someone, they might talk about that on their social media, put a link to that in their stories. Maybe they push it out on email. If people miss that story or didn't read that email, they miss out on that particular piece of content. But by having all of the clips and all of the collaborations, there's multiple ways that they can then consume that full piece of content and get the full value from it. So by collaborating, you're increasing your reach, you're extending the life of that long form content, you're saving yourself time with content creation. It's a win-win-win all around. So that's my tip for this week, is to really focus on making the most of all of that content that you're creating, especially if you're doing live interviews and things with guests and so on and so forth. Maverick messages then. Time for Maverick messages. This is where people who are listening to the podcast, watching the podcast, or just messaging me randomly on social media, or even my clients, I just take basically an interesting question that I've received in the last week and I answer it here. Now, if you are listening to this on Spotify, there is a little like poll thing that you can do. And basically you can just ask a question in there and then that will be in my list to answer. And maybe even because you chose to fill it out, maybe even I'll prioritize it, right? So if it's a good question, I'll answer it on a future episode of the show. So this question basically came from a one-to-one client, and it wasn't necessarily phrased as a question, although I think it has value in terms of talking about it in this way. So we were discussing about social proof, and I won't give away who this is because he won't want me to do that. But essentially, he's at, I would say, the top of his field that he works in. And he works with a lot of people who are at the top of their field. He's like the go-to guy. If you're at the top of his niche, he is the go-to guy. So he's got a lot of credibility. Basically, people are they're athletes, they're winning stuff like medals, championships all over the shop. They're winning stuff. And he's always been a bit reluctant to share that as social proof because he's like very humble guy. Like he doesn't want to say like, I am the guy that got all of these great results. Aren't I brilliant? Come work with me. He kind of just wants to say, you know what? These athletes, they put in the work. They were the ones that got these results, not me. So I don't want to claim credit for them getting these results when I wasn't the one that did the work. Like I just guided them in the right direction. And I was like, whoa, dude. Whoa. There's a big difference between claiming those results as yours and not talking about them at all, because he clearly has a massive input in that success. Like, for example, you could take, like, I'm a big fan of MMA, big fan of the UFC, right? The fighters that get in the cage, they're the ones doing the work, right? But they always talk about their coaches. They talk about whether it is their boxing coach, their jiu-jitsu coach, their head coach, whatever it is, nutritionist. They shout all these guys out because they know that it was their effort, their insight, their plan that helped them get to that moment where they're in that cage and they were able to perform at their best. And yes, it's over to them to actually get the job done, but there is a team of people that are helping them. And it was that sort of thing that I was talking about with him, was that you can talk about all of these achievements as not necessarily you achieved them and it was all down to you, but your methods, your processes have helped to create these world champions, these European champions, these British champions, these podium places and stuff like that. That's your process contributing to that outcome. And that is a very, very legitimate thing. So then we got onto this topic of, well, you know, it feels a little bit sleazy to keep talking about achievements and stuff like that, which then got me thinking about, there is this interesting question about, is there a point where social proof becomes too much? Is there a point where just keeping on talking about your results actually becomes tiring and fatiguing and boring to your audience? I think there's a mixed answer to this question, and I don't think there's one like right or wrong. And I'll give you a few different takes on the whole thing. Like, one is that you don't really hear or see me talk about my client results that much. There are a few references, maybe in some emails in my onboarding sequence. I have a webinar where I talk about one specific client and a few references to others and things like that. But most of my clients that come and work with me don't want their financial information strewn all over social media for all to see. They don't want me to be saying, oh, this person's earning that much, this person's earning that much. It would be very beneficial for me and my business to say that, but I respect that desire for a little bit of privacy with their business. And so I don't necessarily talk that much about the specific financials of what people achieve, which makes it arguably a little bit harder for me to add really kind of meaty social proof into my marketing. And what I tend to do is focus on other things to do that rather than dig into pure financials and things like that. Like, for example, I know people who are in the fitness industry who don't want to share before and after transformations of people in their pants, because like, who wants to have pictures of themselves in their pants strewn over social media? Like, maybe a few vain people do, but not many people do, right? So again, there is that element of respecting that client's wishes to not have their either personal information or business information strewn all over social media. So I tend to hang back with my social proof from that point of view. I will ask for a testimonial from a client, and maybe they talk about the process, they talk about their experience, they might say, we've got more leads than ever before, or my business has grown significantly. And if they choose not to include the finances in that, then that's cool, right? So that's the kind of way I sort of manage that sleazy versus non-sleazy, like what feels right to me. And what feels right to me is not plastering financial information all over social media and so on and so forth, unless that client has specifically said, I want you to go and do that. So that's where I kind of have that line of what is sleazy and what is not. And again, someone who's in in the same business but maybe has a totally different viewpoint, go for it. Share whatever you want. I don't care. And the other aspect of it is that what is the point of the social proof, especially on social media? I think that if you have the potential client at the core of your thinking, it should never become sleazy. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. What a lot of people tend to use social proof for is to say, look at me, aren't I great? Come and work with me. And that is logical to some degree. But what it often does is lead you down that path of being sleazy. It might not mean that you are a sleazy person or you're a sleazy salesman who's trying to scam people out of money and you've got a terrible product and stuff like that. But in terms of people's perception, it can be off-putting. What is better to do is to put the potential client at the focal point of that piece of content. And the way that you can do that, we've been using weight loss as an example, so let's keep on doing that, is that if you've got someone who's lost 10 kilos in the last 8 weeks, for example, then you could say, look at this person, they lost 10 kilos in 8 weeks. Aren't I great? Come and work with me if you want to lose weight. Absolutely fine if you want to do that. And it will probably generate you some leads. But a better way to do it, which would keep you out of that sleazy section. And by the way, I'm not saying that marketing in that previous way is sleazy. I'm just saying that maybe if that was done all the time, then it gets a little bit tiresome and borderline sleazy. So it's not in and of itself sleazy, just to clarify. What you could do is say, right, okay, what about this particular client's story, their journey, is relevant to someone who is potentially considering my coaching? So is it that the person who achieved the transformation had a lack of time and they were a busy working mom in the city who didn't have time to do all these workouts, prepare healthy foods and stuff like that? That was their core problem. And your process, your coaching helps solve that problem. And that's what unlocks their ability to go and achieve that 10 kilos in 8 weeks. By focusing the story of their caption or the email, whatever it may be, on that problem and how you help them transform based on solving that problem, that now makes your post relevant to your prospect. So you're focusing not necessarily on the outcome, you're focused on the change that allowed the outcome to come to fruition. And that is a key difference, because you're now saying, I'm not just trying to ram this result down your throat. I'm telling you, like, the situation, like, this person had this problem and this is how we worked together and how we unlocked the solution. Now someone can say, right, I've got that problem and now I can see how that solution would work for me in this scenario and how I could potentially achieve the weight loss I'm looking for. Now at that point, they're not even thinking about this person that you've put onto this transformation. They're now actually thinking, okay, right, actually, this could actually work for me. And that's, to me, is a way you can share that social proof consistently without being sleazy. The other way you can do it is by sharing consistently in your, let's say, for example, Instagram stories, Facebook stories, things like that, snippets of like work in progress. So it's not always about the end result. It's about what people say when they're kind of interacting with you, little DMs and things like that. For example, a couple of days ago, I had a client who asked me if I had a training on opt-in pages. And I was pretty sure I did have a training on opt-in pages. It was in one of my courses somewhere, but by the time I would have looked for it, I could have recorded something quicker. So I spent 10 minutes just recording a little training on opt-ins. And he wrote back and said, dude, this is fucking epic. This is amazing. So I just screenshotted that, took his name off it, put that on social media, and then told people this was about a recording that I'd done about opt-in pages, right? So that's a little bit of social proof, just shared that kind of non-sleazy way, right? Then, so there are ways in which you can be less sleazy and in your face about the whole social proof thing. The other thing, like the other flip side of that, is that when someone is ready to buy, I don't think there's a situation where there is too much social proof. If you think about, there's a pyramid, the Chet Holmes pyramid, which I reference in my book, Poster Profits. If you want to go and buy that, go for it. I believe his book is called The Ultimate Sales Machine. Just looking behind me up the shelf. The Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes. He talks about this pyramid where basically it's the percentage of people who are like ready to buy. And I think the numbers off the top of my head, top 7% of people in your audience, those are the people that are either absolutely ready to buy or on the cusp of being ready to part with their cash, right? And therefore, you've got 93% of your audience that basically aren't interested, at least yet, in buying something. So you might annoy a few people at the bottom of that pyramid who just don't want to buy. And that's social proof, that message you keep putting out, assuming they're still reading emails and consuming content, might be a little bit annoying. And they might tick the box that says that is a bit sleazy. But actually, those people are never going to buy. So who cares if they think it's sleazy, right? It just doesn't matter. Like, you're not going to buy from me anyway. So just leave me alone, go away. But that top 7%, if you're consistently putting out like result, there's never enough social proof for them to be convinced that you can do what you say you do and get them the result that they want. So I think, like, is there a point where social proof gets sleazy? Probably yes, but it's such a non-black and white answer. There's so much gray and context and nuance that really you kind of have to explore the situation for your own business is kind of where I would say. So social proof shared in the right way for your business, where it's at, what you're promoting, what the audience wants, there's probably never enough. But if you do it in the wrong way, then yeah, there's way too much social proof. So that's the basic answer on that question. Finally, then, we're moving through to social media news. And this is all about the best platform to capture attention with ads. If you are someone who is running ads, thinking about ads, the thing that's probably top of your mind is you don't want to waste your money. You don't want to throw a bunch of cash at Zuckerberg and co, or Musk, or whoever it is who's running Google these days, and waste that money, that valuable money. You want to get something back. You want that return on ad spend. You want that ROAS as high as possible, right? So where should you put your cash? This was a very interesting piece of data that was basically summarized in a small article on Apple Newsstand. And what came out of this particular study was that YouTube is the number one place to capture attention with ads. And I believe that their criteria for capture attention was actually like it turned into clicks and turned into spend. It didn't just, it wasn't like watch time of the ads or something like that. It was actual specific action taken on that ad. YouTube, number one place to advertise your products and your services. Me personally, I've dabbled with YouTube ads, but I have to confess, when I first kind of dabbled in them, I didn't really understand them too much. But having watched this, read this particular article, I'm definitely going to revisit that training that I did on YouTube ads. The interesting one is that second place is X, Twitter. Right? That is the second best social media platform to go with your ad spend to capture attention, which kind of surprised me, right? Because there's a lot of hate around Elon right now and his platform and how he's developing it, shall we say. And I'm not going to comment on all the ins and outs of all that right now. We'll get bogged down with all of the politics around all of that. But just to say that if ethically you want to advertise on X, Twitter, whatever, then it's second in terms of capturing attention. It might be a good place to explore. The other interesting thing is that they don't class podcast platforms as social media, because I guess you're not really kind of engaging. There's no like this back and forth social media type thing. It's just a broadcast channel. So it's not technically a social media platform. But podcasting advertising is second behind YouTube. So whilst X is the second social media platform, podcast is the second behind YouTube overall. Again, very interesting to me as someone who records podcasts and things like that. Now, for podcast advertising, and again, it's a long time since I explored podcast advertising, is that there are some like rules and restrictions, at least back in the day when I was looking at it, is your show had to get a number of downloads per episode in order to qualify for advertising. So you can't just like bang ads behind a podcast that gets one download and stuff like that. It's pointless. You've got to have some volume to the whole thing. Therefore, it might not be a suitable strategy for a lot of people to go and start to try and think about advertising or, prospecting for advertisers to advertise on their platform. But it might be a good place to advertise organically. For example, at the beginning of this podcast, I talked about, if you go into the show notes, there is a free 32-page guide to help you use direct response tactics on social media to get more leads and sales. Absolutely. You can get that. You can still get that right now in the description and the show notes below. Obviously, at that point, most people will know that you're going to get that in exchange for an email address. And that email address puts you on my email list. And then there's going to be a series of marketing related emails. I'm not like, I'm breaking the fourth wall telling you that that's a lead magnet, right? I'm sure you figured that out, right? But maybe then podcasting is a better way for me to generate leads, high quality leads for the products that I'm selling, the services that I'm selling. And maybe that's because I'm looking down at the timer, it's 56:20. So 56 minutes, 20 seconds so far on this podcast. And therefore, someone who's made it this far has listened to me for nearly an hour talk about marketing, right? And that allows me to build better connection with that person. It allows me to impart more knowledge, to give more value, to help that person out more. Imagine how many 15-second reels I'd have to record to get to that same level of value and that same level of connection with that listener. So if someone then opts in, then, a lot of that nurture process has already happened that would have to take place on email. So maybe podcasting is, for that reason, podcast advertising is a great way because you've got a much more engaged audience. Now, obviously, if you're advertising, you're basically earning money from that advertising. You could just have like a load of random adverts for Viagra and manscaping and whatever it is. But the point being is that maybe because of the engaged nature of the audience, they can be a great place for you to actually start to strategically talk about your products and your services. Like I've talked about, it wasn't necessarily intentional, but I talked about clients. I talked about one-to-one clients and things like that. So someone could argue that obviously there was no sales pitch in there, but that sows the seed that there is this one-to-one service available, right? That someone might be interested in. And again, putting those throughout a podcast where you're talking to someone at length might be advantageous. The other thing that was interesting out the whole of this article was that Facebook was the worst place to place an ad for attention, which seemed really, really surprising to me because, when you're thinking about running ads, most people kind of, especially like if they're marketing on social media, they think about Facebook ads and Instagram ads. That's the first place they go, right? And maybe it's bottom because it's a saturated marketplace. Like it's the ads all over the place. So nothing really stands out. People just skipping past all this stuff left, right, and center. But it came out last behind Reddit. I didn't even know you could advertise on Reddit. Pinterest, Snapchat, LinkedIn, TikTok. Facebook is behind them all. It's behind Instagram as well. Instagram's a little bit further up. But maybe is that you should think about, okay, well, is if I want to spend some money on ads, is Facebook and Instagram the right place to do that? Because clearly for the ad spend you're putting in, the return to capture attention is just not there, at least to the degree of other platforms. Now, before you run away and start, abandoning Facebook ads and Instagram ads and all that sort of stuff, there are a couple of things that you might want to just pump the brakes on and think about before you go do all of that. One thing is that context matters, because in a study like this, they're going to be looking at possibly millions and millions of pieces of data from multiple industries all over the world and combining that together to get a picture of this advertising spend versus attention. But your local level knowledge could say that I know most of my audience are on Instagram. So yes, whilst worldwide across multiple industries, the Instagram is lower down the chain than Snapchat or TikTok, none of my audience is on those two platforms. So why would I spend my ad dollars and pounds there? I still need to put it into Facebook. It needs to still put it into Instagram. So that's the first thing that you want to think about is context matters. You know your audience, or you should know your audience. And if you do, you will know where that attention is. And therefore, don't change everything just because someone says in a study that YouTube is way better for attention. If YouTube is the right place to go and advertise, cool, go and experiment. But if it's not, stick to where you're at right now. The second thing is basically, I'm going to go and experiment with some YouTube ads, basically, is what I'm going to do, because I'm creating content on YouTube. I'm talking at length about various different topics. I think that it's going to be a case of, I think I'm going to experiment with YouTube because it's going to be a case of, I've got lots of long form content and short form content, articles, things like that, lead magnets. And I think basically YouTube is a search engine. YouTube is a Google. People go to YouTube to find stuff. And so therefore, a YouTube user probably has a lot of data sitting behind, in the algorithms, to be able to match content to the right people. So probably there is an unexplored, untapped potential there with YouTube video ads. So I'm going to go and explore that. And then the last thing, I've already talked about it, is using your podcast as your own advertising platform. So to talk about products, to talk about services, to offer lead magnets, things like that. If you're grabbing attention for lengthy periods of time with a podcast, then it's very advantageous potentially to use that as your advertising platform to generate more interest into your products and services. So hopefully you enjoyed the last hour of this podcast. If you did, like I said, if you're talking or you're listening on Spotify, you can drop a question into the question box and I will answer it on a future episode of the podcast. And if you are on any platform that can do rating and reviews, please do that. Obviously, give me the 5 stars, makes sense. And of course, you can follow me on Instagram and all that sort of good stuff. And don't forget to check those show notes out. But for now, I will see you soon on the next episode of the Social Mavericks podcast.